I'm 65, and lately, I've started pulling away from people. Not because I'm angry, not because I want to be alone, but because I've learned something important. Not everyone deserves your time or your peace. When I was younger, I was the kind of person who was always there for others. I believed that living a good life meant living a big life, filled with relationships, gatherings, check-ins, and constant presence. I remembered birthdays. I made the calls. I showed up for every family event, even when I was so tired inside it felt like I could cry. But as the years passed, I started to notice something. I was giving more than I had. Some conversations left me drained, just listening to complaints, criticism, or sitting in empty silence. Some relationships I kept out of guilt, worried that if I let go, someone else might be hurt. But what about me? One morning, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. The sunlight slipped through the curtains like a quiet reminder, and I asked myself, if I only had 5 years left to live, would I want to spend it in rooms that leave me exhausted? The answer was clear, no. Since then, I've started shrinking my world. Fewer people, less noise, but more peace. More moments that truly matter. This video isn't for everyone. It's for those who are entering a new chapter. A chapter where we don't need to prove anything to anyone. Where we begin asking, how much time do I really have left? Who do I want to spend it with? And how can I live more simply, but more deeply? If you've ever felt drained from always having to be available for others, if you've ever felt lonely in a room full of people, if you've ever wondered, is it wrong to just want a quieter life? Then stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to share what changed the way I live after turning 65. Not in the form of advice, but through real experience. Not to make you live like me, but to help you live true to yourself. This journey starts with one simple realization. Time is no longer unlimited, and that's the first truth we'll explore together. I remember when I was younger, I thought time was like a river that would never run dry. I spent it the way people spend birthday money, quickly, carelessly, rarely thinking about its real value. I used to give away hours of my life to conversations that went nowhere, to relationships that had run their course, and to things I didn't truly want to do, just because I didn't know how to say no. Back then, I thought I had my whole life ahead of me. But turning 65 taught me something. Life isn't as long as you think. At this age, you start to feel time differently. It's no longer this endless stretch ahead of you. It's a limited account, and every moment suddenly feels more precious. The way I notice a sunny morning, a warm cup of tea, a genuine conversation, it's completely different than it was 20 years ago. I no longer want to fill my time. I want to fill it with meaning. I used to say yes far too often, and afterward, I'd regret trading a peaceful afternoon for yet another draining social obligation. Now I ask myself, is this really worth it? Will this make me happy, or just keep me busy? I have a friend named Linda. She used to be the busiest person I knew, back-to-back meetings, phone ringing constantly. But after a minor health scare, she told me something I'll never forget. I realized that time doesn't need to be filled. It just needs to be lived fully. So she changed. Fewer appointments, more quiet mornings. Her life isn't as packed as it once was, but it's never felt more complete. After 65, time is no longer just about how much you have left. It becomes about how you're living each minute of it. If you've been feeling like the days are flying by, if you're finding yourself more thoughtful before accepting invitations, that's not you getting old. That's you getting wise. And when you start respecting your time, you start respecting yourself. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore another major shift that happens after 65. How we see our relationships. Because just like our time, the people we choose to keep around matter more than ever. Not everything deserves to stay. Some things were never meant to last forever. And now, we finally have the courage to choose, intentionally. I used to believe that a good life was measured by how many relationships you had. The more friends you had, the more parties you were invited to, the more people who called your name in a crowded room, the more valuable your life seemed. And honestly, when I was younger, that belief gave me a sense of security. I wanted to be the kind one, the dependable one, the person who never missed a get-together, even if I didn't have the energy to smile. But over time, I came to a hard-earned truth. Not every relationship is worth holding on to. There are people who make you feel like yourself every time you're around them. You don't have to try. You don't have to perform. You can sit in silence and still feel completely at ease. And then, there are people who leave you exhausted. You tiptoe through conversations, smile through discomfort, and keep the peace while your heart quietly begs for space. I remember sitting at a crowded family gathering, laughter and chatter all around me, yet feeling completely alone. That day, I realized something. I wasn't lonely because I had no one. I was lonely because I was surrounded by people who didn't really see or care about me. That moment marked the beginning of a shift. I didn't cut people out of anger or resentment. I simply started choosing truth over obligation. I wanted a life that felt real, not just full. Just like my friend Linda, the one I've mentioned before. She used to have a phone full of names. Now, she keeps only a handful, the ones who can sit with her in tears and stay quiet when words aren't needed. I've learned that real connection doesn't need a lot of noise, just enough honesty. I no longer feel guilty turning down invitations. I no longer feel out of place for choosing a book over a loud reunion. Because I know now, one heartfelt conversation with someone who truly gets you is worth more than 10 dinner tables filled with forced laughter. And if you're feeling the urge to shrink your circle, to let go of the noise, you're not broken. You're just growing up again. Because friendship isn't about quantity. It's about the quality of connection, the kind where you can simply be you, no performance required. And once you've learned how to choose the right people to keep close, you'll face another equally important lesson: how to let go of relationships that may feel familiar but are no longer healthy. In the next part of this journey, we'll talk about that. When letting go is no longer a failure, but an act of courage and self-respect. I used to think that love meant holding on, trying a little harder, forgiving one more time, staying longer than your heart could handle. But one day, I realized, some things hurt more the tighter you hold them. I think back to Elaine, my best friend from high school. We were once inseparable, like sisters. But over time, I started to feel drained after seeing her. She talked endlessly, but never once asked how I was doing. She constantly asked for help, but never checked if I had anything left to give. Every time I hesitated to create some distance, a familiar voice in my head would say, "Come on, you don't just let go of a longtime friend over little things like this." It took nearly 5 years before I finally found the courage to draw a boundary. I stopped answering every call immediately, stopped saying yes just out of guilt. Eventually, the friendship faded into silence. And strangely enough, I didn't feel the sadness I had expected. I felt relief, like I had just taken off a coat that had been too tight for years. Letting go isn't failure. It's a conscious, grown-up choice to protect something that becomes more valuable with age: your peace. Not every relationship needs saving. Some are best honored by letting them rest in memory. Because if you're constantly stretching yourself just to keep a relationship alive, maybe the thing you need to hold onto isn't them. It's you. You can start with a simple question: does this relationship make me feel loved, or does it make me feel small? If the answer is the latter, give yourself permission to step back. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. And the strange thing is, once you release what's been quietly wearing you down, you'll feel lighter than you ever imagined. But you'll also find yourself becoming more careful, especially when it comes to trust, something that used to feel instinctive, but now feels like a decision. In the next part of our journey, we'll enter a more delicate space. How do you continue to trust others without losing yourself in the process? Because shutting down isn't the answer, but trusting the wrong person after 65? That kind of hurt cuts deeper than most. There's something people don't often tell you after 60. Trust doesn't come as easily as it used to. When I was younger, trusting people felt natural. I assumed that anyone who came into my life meant well. That kind words always came from a place of care. And yes, I did experience some truly beautiful relationships. But I also fell apart more than once from trusting the wrong person. There was a former colleague I once considered like a younger sister. As I was preparing to retire, I took her under my wing, showed her everything, down to the smallest details. But just a month later, She removed my name from a key project and never once acknowledged what I had done for her. I wasn't angry, but I closed the door in my heart quietly. After a few experiences like that, I started living more cautiously. I no longer shared too much, too soon. No longer opened up right away. And honestly, there were moments I wondered, am I becoming cold? But in time, I came to realize I hadn't lost my ability to trust. I was just learning to place it more carefully. Trust isn't something you give to everyone equally. It's a gift, one that should be offered only to those who are patient and kind enough to prove they're worthy of it. Now I observe more, not from a place of suspicion, but with quiet attention. Do they keep their word? Do they remember the small things I've shared? Do they listen even when I'm silent? Trust, after 65, is no longer about promises. It's about steady actions, repeated, unflashy, and sincere. I have a neighbor named Richard. At first, I kept my distance, but after every rainfall, I noticed he'd clear the leaves off my front steps. He never said a word about it, never expected thanks, just quietly did it, again and again. And from people like that, trust begins to return, naturally, like spring after a long winter. The lesson I've learned is this: you don't have to shut your heart to protect it. You just need to know when to open it, and to whom. Because here's a gentle truth. Trust shouldn't disappear. It should simply become more discerning. And when you learn how to trust selectively, love with boundaries, and connect with intention, something remarkable begins to happen. The quieter life gets, the clearer your inner voice becomes. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore why living simply isn't about having less. It's about experiencing life more deeply. And why, after 65, simplicity becomes one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. I used to think that living simply meant doing less, that it was something that just happened with age, a gradual fading of responsibilities, energy, and motion. But after turning 65, I realized something very different. Living simply doesn't mean living less. It means living more deeply. I remember visiting an old friend named Carol. She used to be a teacher, ran the neighborhood committee, always had a calendar as full as a CEO's. Now she lives in a small house with very few belongings. No social media, no packed schedule, but her eyes sparkled, her voice was calm, and her smile. There was something about it that made me want to stay just a little longer. I asked her, "Don't you miss being busy all the time?" She took a slow sip of tea and replied, "I may not be busy, but I've never felt more alive." Simplicity isn't about giving everything up. It's about holding on to only what truly makes you feel alive. So I started slowing down, like Carol. I stopped leaving the TV on during meals, deleted a few apps from my phone, cut back on checking the news 5 times a day. And instead, I walked slower, made coffee slower, called my family more often. Strangely enough, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I felt full, truly full, because when you slow down enough, you begin to notice the little things that have always been there, but drowned out. The sound of birds in the early morning, the smell of sunshine in your clothes, the quiet joy of doing something simply because you want to, not because you have to. Living simply is about turning down the noise, so you can truly hear your own heartbeat. Here's the lesson I've learned. Life only feels complicated when we try to hold on to too many things we don't really need. But when we begin to let go of time wasters, clutter, and even certain relationships, what we're left with is what truly nourishes the soul. And the more I simplified my life, the more I realized something else. I don't need to constantly be surrounded by people to feel complete. In the next part of this journey, I want to invite you into a deeper reflection, one that many people quietly fear, but which I've come to see as one of the greatest gifts of growing older: stillness, solitude, and the truth that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Let's explore that together, right after this. There's a question I've often heard whispered among older adults. Am I lonely or just alone? The difference between those two is paper thin, but it changes everything about how you experience growing older. Loneliness is when you're surrounded by people and still feel empty. Solitude, on the other hand, a gentle kind of intentional stillness, is when you're by yourself and don't feel like anything's missing. I began to truly understand that when I was 67, after my husband passed away. The early days were hard. The house felt too quiet. I could hear the ticking of the clock louder than my own footsteps. But in that silence, I began to notice things I had always rushed past. The tap of a bird on the window pane, the soft whistle of the kettle just before it boiled, and the voice of my own heart, gentle, honest, and finally being heard. I no longer woke up because of an alarm. I woke up because the sunlight was pouring into the room. I didn't eat because the clock told me to. I ate when I was truly hungry. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and an old book, and I caught myself smiling. Not because someone texted, not because of a funny joke, just because I felt whole, sitting quietly with myself. Solitude taught me a simple but powerful truth. You don't need someone else to fill the quiet spaces inside you. You just need to learn how to sit with them and realize they're not empty. There's sacred space for you to be exactly who you are. And here's the beautiful part. When you become comfortable in your own stillness, you also become more intentional about who you invite into it. Not out of fear, but because you found peace within yourself. And now you only want relationships that add to that peace, not take it away. Which led me to one of the most important lessons I've learned after 65. Distancing yourself from certain people isn't selfish, it's self-love. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore why saying no to some people can be an act of courage and freedom, not a closing of your heart, and how to recognize the right people to keep close in this season of life. There was a time when I believed that distancing myself from someone was a cold thing to do. I worried that pulling back would make people think I was difficult, or worse, that I was lonely. But after feeling emotionally drained one too many times from conversations that lacked honesty and care, I came to a quiet realization. Creating distance isn't about rejecting others. It's about choosing peace for yourself. I used to have a friend named Susan. She was cheerful, outgoing, the life of every party. But the more time I spent with her, the more I noticed I always felt worn out afterward. Every conversation was about her, long, endless rants, and I started to feel like an emotional dumping ground. I kept enduring it for years, telling myself things like, she's an old friend. She probably just needs to vent. Until one day, during a phone call that lasted nearly an hour, I realized I had only spoken 3 sentences. That's when I paused and asked myself, do I really need to keep investing in this relationship just because of our history, when the present is quietly chipping away at my self-respect? So I stepped back. No drama, no harsh words, just slower replies, fewer yes, and eventually, a gentle closing of that chapter. Surprisingly, I didn't feel lonely. I felt light, like I had finally taken off a backpack I didn't even realize I'd been carrying for years. I started looking at all my relationships through a clearer lens. Who makes me feel like I can be fully myself? Who makes me smile without needing to say a word? Who truly asks, are you okay? And actually waits for the answer? Those were the people I chose to keep. Here's the lesson that stayed with me. Peace isn't something you beg for from others. It's something you claim for yourself by walking away from the places that make you feel small. You don't need to stay in relationships out of fear of being misunderstood. The people who really know your heart won't need an explanation, and the ones who don't won't understand, no matter how hard you try to explain. And when you're brave enough to choose who gets access to your life, you begin to see that growing older isn't about being left behind. It's about finally living the way you were always meant to. Freely, calmly, and more honestly than ever before. In the final part of this journey, we'll bring everything together, not with a goodbye, but with a gentle reminder. Aging isn't an ending. It's a new chapter. One where you get to live more deeply, more truthfully, and fully for yourself. I'm 65, and I've chosen to distance myself from certain people. Not because I'm angry at them, but because I've finally learned how to love myself. As we get older, we don't have as much time to waste. Not on empty conversations, one-sided relationships, or social obligations that leave us drained. For years, I tried to hold on to everything, believing that being kind means never saying no. But I've come to understand that sometimes, Protecting your peace matters more than preserving politeness. So I began to shrink my circle. I slowed down, and I started spending more time with myself. Not because I was lonely, but because I found joy in intentional quiet. I learned how to listen to my own heart again, and I chose to be around people who make me feel like I can be fully me. No pretending, no performance. Personally, I believe this. Walking away from what wears you down isn't selfish. It's the heart growing wiser, knowing what's truly worthy of the time you have left. If this speaks to you, I invite you to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to join me on this journey. A journey of living true, living fully, and living deeply. Because growing older isn't about closing the book. It's about choosing to write your next chapter in your own voice.